Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and as a public access station, we don't do commercials. Blessedly, we don't. But we are going to do a PSA today because, as many of you know, we are being threatened by the FCC removing their funding for us. And so that leaves us in a bit of a jam, and we are hoping for getting support. So we're putting out a call to all of you. If you like public access TV, realize what an important part it is for our freedom of speech here in this country. Please go to brattleboro.tv.org. And at the bottom of the page, there's a little place where you can click on support and it will walk you through it. We would love to get your donations. Anything large or small would be most welcome. Thank you. That's the end of the PSA. And now I am very happy to introduce our guest for this week, who is Claire Wilson. Many of you know Claire. She is someone who has always loved to work with her hands. She's been a potter, a weaver, and most notably a knitter and designer of knitting patterns. She's one of the founders of the renowned Green Mountain Spinnery up in Putney, which is a thriving and soon-to-be 40-year-old business, local business, that all began with one bright idea. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show.
Happy to be here.
Yes, I'm glad you're here. Before we get to talking about the spinnery and all of that and how that all started, we want to hear about your early years, which was growing up basically Connecticut and New Jersey.
First New Jersey and then Connecticut.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I went through elementary school in New Jersey, and then World War II came about, and my father was asked to be the manager of a radar plant, I guess one would call it, in Connecticut. So we moved to Connecticut.
Ah.
And that's where I went through what we then called junior high and high school.
Uh-huh. And you had a mother who was also a handcrafter.
Oh my goodness, a superb seamstress. Mm. She made all our dresses for me and my sister, and she made tailored suits and perfection.
Yeah. Did she do household curtains and upholstery and all that too?
Oh yes, yes.
Did you learn from her? Did she teach you?
I certainly did some dressmaking with her, but I certainly never did slip covers or anything that complicated.
And tailoring's a whole art.
Tailoring, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Make a tailored jacket fit somebody?
Yes,
Ooh.
right.
Yeah.
I'd love to have a tailor, wouldn't you?
Yes.
You had one.
I had my own private tailor.
That's really wonderful. Yeah. And so your dad was working in a radar plant during World War II.
He was.
Do you have any stories about that, or did you have an understanding of what he was doing?
I can't say I understood in any depth, but one story that I treasure and remember is at one point someone came to apply for a job that was open, and it happened to be a young Japanese American. And at this point, you know, Japanese Americans on the West Coast were being put into detention camps,
That's right.
taken out of their homes and put elsewhere. Well, my dad knew this young man was qualified, but word got out in his workplace, and several people said, well, if you hire him, we're going to quit. Well, he hired him. And people grew to love him. He was wonderful.
That's so great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That also shows an incredible broad-mindedness of your dad.
Well, he grew up with socialist parents.
Oh, he did?
Should I say that? Maybe not.
You can say it's public access TV.
And his workers, he offered them the opportunity to meet with union people to see if they wanted to join union. And they said, well, how would they benefit us more than what you give us?
Wow.
So they didn't want to meet with the union organizer. So
that's very impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a
That's
good
wonderful.
guy. Good guy.
Sounds like it, yes. Do you have a first memory of learning how to knit?
Yes. My mother went downtown, and there was a storefront selling things for Russian war relief.
Russian war relief.
Our good friends, the Russians, in World War II. And she came home with some yarn and a mimeographed pattern for a vest for the Russian army. It was, whatever that color is that's for army stuff.
Sort of olive drab?
Yeah, sort of that color yarn. And we sat there together and figured out how to knit that vest. So that was my first real project.
Uh-huh.
And the second real project was for the British Navy.
Really?
Yeah. We were already involved in the war when those projects happened. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was, those were fairly sizable projects for a beginning knitter.
I'll bet, but boy, you must have learned it really well.
It really got me hooked.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and are you the kind of knitter that just wants to knit? Like you want to go home and work on your project?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you still are?
Oh, you want to see it finished.
Right.
Yeah.
After those early years, Claire, you went on to college and you went to Antioch.
I did. The undergraduate, what was then the only Antioch.
Yes.
Which was in Yellow Springs, Ohio, the undergraduate program. Yes. And that's where I met my future husband. He had been drafted in the Army and happened to, he was being trained to thrust bayonets into people. And he was on the troop ship going over to, I think, Okinawa when the atom bombs were dropped. So what he ended up doing was being in Japan as a military police, patrolling the streets, and absolutely fell in love with the Japanese children. And he thought, ooh, I could have been killing their fathers. It turned him into an absolutely confirmed pacifist. Yeah.
Yes, being up close and personal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he came home after that experience. You were already married?
No.
You weren't married yet?
No. He was 4 years older than I. And so he came to Antioch as one of the veterans. There were a lot of veterans in undergraduate programs at that point. Yeah. Under the GI Bill.
I was going to say he qualified, right?
Yes. Yeah. Under the GI Bill.
So during those years, when the two of you were, I guess, getting together, you were both drawn to Quakerism.
Yes. There was a Friends Meeting House on the campus. I'd grown up with an atheist father, actually, and was taking a comparative religion class. And I thought, we went around visiting different churches, and I thought it would be good to see what the Quakers were about.
At some point, you get married, and you actually, I think that there were probably a couple kids involved there after you got married. And now, did you join the AFSC, or did your husband work for? Actually, I'm sorry, the AFSC is the American Friends Service Committee,
Yes, right.
which is a Quaker organization.
Yes, it's connected with the Quakers. Yeah. Not exclusively Quaker.
Right.
He had always wanted to return to Japan, actually. And because I was so interested in pottery, I was making some pottery at that point. It just seemed like, why not? We wanted to do that. And there was a program of the AFSC in Japan. So we were able to go with our two children who had been through kindergarten and first grade at that point.
In America, and then they go over to a completely different country. That must have been quite a shock.
Well, it surely was for them.
Yeah.
Our thinking was, well, heck, kids come here from different countries and they have to just go to school. So we would just have our children go to school. Well, there was one other non-Japanese child in that school. And so, I mean, the elementary school, everything was in Japanese, so sink or swim.
Yeah, how did they do with it?
It was very difficult in the beginning, really hard. And through the Friends Service Committee, we found a young college graduate Japanese woman who spoke very good English and came to tutor our kids for a while. She was wonderful. Our home was also had the office space for the AFSC program, the Japanese program. And so there would be evening meetings at some point, and one of our Japanese guests said, you know, this was after at least 6 months. If I close my eyes, I don't know it's not Japanese children speaking.
That's exciting. And this was during the Cold War. Sure
was.
Yeah. And did that have an effect on your husband's job and how you were living your lives there?
This was at a time when there wasn't at this point a lot of getting together between the Russians and the Americans, and other nationalities too. And the idea was exchange ideas.
Exchange ideas, yeah. How interesting for you to start out knitting vests for the Russian soldiers, right? And end up in the middle of the Cold War in Japan?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sure that wasn't lost on you, the irony. You were in Japan for a few years, and then at some point you ended up in Putney. What brought you to Putney?
Did end up in Putney, and that was after we had returned to the U.S., I guess it was about a year later, Antioch was embarking on this graduate school program and actually had centers in several different places around the country. Baltimore, Washington, something out in California. I don't remember where all. And a center in Putney, Vermont. I think it was Morris Milgram, whose wife was connected with the Putney School, and Morris Milgram thought, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to train teachers for schools such as the Putney School? And he led a graduate program for several years. Any of you know Ann Fines up in Putney, who taught for many, many years, went to that program, and they would go down south and help people register voters.
Wow.
Do things like that.
Really?
Training social studies teachers, get this, for inner city schools.
Right. So your kids are in school, you're working in the community, you're working in the library, we're in the 70s now, 60s, 70s?
We came in
60s,
'66.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're a little bit involved in the anti-war movement, having had a good socialist father. Oh, you started weaving during that time?
I did. We found a woman in New Hampshire who was teaching weaving, and decided, well, that would be fun. She was wonderful, a woman named Margaret Carter, and she belonged to the New Hampshire Weavers Guild. So that was very crucial in my development as a weaver, learning from other weavers who were members of the Weavers Guild.
Right, so more of a group kind of learning experience.
Yeah, learning from each other.
Yes, right. And you also got involved in, yet again, another Quaker organization, a Quaker study group.
It was a group that came out of a Quaker-oriented community in Philadelphia that had developed a curriculum that several of us decided to take that study group. There were readings specified and things like E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful, and I think it was the Club of Rome study that back in the early 70s was talking about the energy crisis.
Yeah.
And environmental issues.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's incredible when you look back at the 70s and to see how many things were just starting up. The Small is Beautiful was a huge book, and so many people took it to heart, and it was all about sustainability and ecological responsibility.
Yes.
Solar panels, which went up on the White House, which did get taken down shortly thereafter. But so many things were starting then. And it's almost as if we're sort of, again,
having to reintroduce,
to reinvent that wheel. In that study group, you made a bunch of good friends, but you also got talking about the sustainability and possibilities.
It was, I remember one of the catchphrases was, and I think maybe still is, think globally, act locally.
Did it come out at that time, that phrase?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
It's still on bumper stickers everywhere.
And so after we had finished that curriculum, those of us who were there in the Putney, Brattleboro area, decided, well, why don't we do a little study of what's happening in Vermont? And we did that. And with my interest in knitting and weaving and using yarns, I was buying yarn from Scandinavia and Scotland and even from Harrisville Designs over in New Hampshire, but their wool for their fine yarn was coming from Australia. So what was happening with the wool that was being grown right here in our own state?
That's right.
It was getting shorn. The only avenue for them, for their wool, was what is called the wool pool, and they were getting pennies. It didn't matter what the quality of the wool was like. It was just all thrown together and not getting rewards if they had paid careful attention to their wool.
And you didn't really have any models at that time. If everyone's getting wool from other places, did something shift that?
There were woolen mills in the state, and some of them had gone out of business. One of them up in Ludlow, interestingly enough, was spinning wool yarn for the inside of baseballs.
I love that. That's great. Did people know that in the audience? I didn't know that. Because I think they still are.
I think it's still wool inside baseballs.
We'll find out. We'll get a little kid
Yeah,
to...
we'll have to research that. Lisa Merton there were several of us weavers who would get together and chew the fat and share ideas and so forth. And she had gone over to Scandinavia, I think Norway in the beginning. She had spent a year there and then I think stayed on and actually worked in a small spinning mill in Sweden and came back with these beautiful samples.
Wow.
And she brought them to our little weavers group. And I looked at her and I said, why don't we do that here? You know, nothing to it.
Here's the bright idea, folks. Why don't we do it here?
Why don't we do it here?
Yep. And thus... Green Mountain Spinnery was born.
Well, after quite some time. But
yes.
Yeah.
You spent a lot of time doing research
quite a bit of
and footwork.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I would go over, actually I went over to Harrisville Designs. They had restarted one of the old mills in Harrisville, which had been, I think, previously just spinning yarn for industrial purposes. But when it restarted, it was specifically creating yarn for really mostly weavers, and I guess some knitters too. And I met a man who was running the big machinery, the carding machines, who had been working in textile mills since he'd been in high school, and he was then in his 60s. And started talking with him about what the crazy idea I had. And after he was finished work at 3 o'clock, he would gather me up and we would go off to visit a mill in New England somewhere that was no longer had use for their old machinery. They were going to retool with computer-driven fancy stuff. What we found out was that often these mills would find buyers for their old machinery in Latin America. And so how were we going to nab some of this machinery? Anyway, finally that we managed to do that. And in the meantime, 2 other members of the study group that I'd been in, David Ritchie and Diana Wally, had come on board with this notion. And Libby Mills, who was teaching weaving at the Putney School. So we joined forces, and with the help of some Tuck Business School students wrote up a business plan and went to the Vermont Industrial Development Authority to get a loan.
Yep.
Went to our friends with this wild idea.
Yeah.
Our friends loaned us money.
Yeah.
We didn't know what the heck we were doing.
Yeah. Right. But it was 6 years of planning and research before
I think it was
then,
probably about that.
And then finding a site
Finding
where
a
you
site.
could do it.
During the first oil embargo, there was a gas station right across from the Putney Inn that had folded because it wasn't getting enough business. And it was for sale by closed bids. How do you bid on a defunct gas station?
Yeah, right. What's it worth?
What's it worth? But we thought that was a good location right there by the highway. So we placed a bid and it was accepted.
In starting this and in being somewhat of a cooperative of 4 very interested parties, you had some key ideas about the business itself. You know, you wanted it to be sustainable for the sheep and shepherds.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We wanted a good use for. If sheep breeders had a particular breed of sheep that had particular qualities, we wanted those qualities to be respected in the yarn that was spun.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And you did a lot of custom spinning, and I guess still do. Is that correct?
More than half of what is made now at the spinnery is custom work.
Custom.
Usually they come to us saying, I have such and such kind of sheep.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and I'd like my own yarn from that wool.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So how to keep that wool separate from everything else.
Yes. And also, of course, one of the key ideas was having it be very high quality.
Of course.
And natural. You're not using any bleaches, you're not using any additives or anything at all.
Right.
Yeah, those are very high standards.
Well, why not?
The template that you created, even though I know you were going by the seat of your pants a lot of the time.
Oh boy.
You're right. You talked about it being, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps or bootstrapping it to get it up and limping. But it's a template for what people are doing now. This is what entrepreneurs are doing now. Of course, they're going out and raising. Many are going out and raising, tens and thousands of dollars in very different ways. But as far as it being artisans in charge of their own whatever it is, product or what they want to be doing, it was something that was a model for then, and it's still a model for now.
True. Yeah.
It's very impressive.
Getting into things we have no way of knowing we can really do. But, when I would go over and visit at Harrisville, here's the machine just running.
Right, you think, sure.
So simple. Not recognizing that the people running those machines have been at it for quite a while.
Right. And that's one thing too, I think anyone who has not been to Green Mountain Spinnery, it's so worth the trip to see this place and to see the machines that are running, that are up and running, mammoth machines. And you walk in, the minute you walk in the door, you get the whole feel of this place, from the smell of the lanolin, to the different fibers that are being created. And also, there's a gift shop of sorts. There's a shop there.
Yeah.
You've come out with the Green Mountain Spinnery knitting book, but also the patterns. That's another thing that you're really known for.
That you're wearing one of.
Well, I was going to say, I did want to point out to the viewers that I'm wearing a Green Mountain sweater. It's a Green Mountain pattern that my mother made for me at least 25 years ago. She is long gone, but it was the last sweater she ever knit for me. So it's a prize sweater, but it's still in fabulous shape. It's a wonderful pattern, and it's a Green Mountain pattern. The book that Margaret Wilson wrote is a beautiful book. It's not only beautiful in design, but the writing in it is really wonderful. It really describes the spinnery in a lot of detail and names a lot of local people who were involved or who came up with their own patterns as well.
Yes, local people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have your patterns in there.
Right?
Yep.
Yes. Well, some of the early patterns were Ida Bell Hegeman, the mother-in-law of Bill Darrow.
Darrow, that's right.
Who used to knit socks for each of her 26 grandchildren every year for Christmas. So that meant a sock a week.
If you do the math on that.
You do the math on that. And she wrote up the pattern that she was using when she knit those socks, and that was one of our early patterns. Yeah.
Great story.
And actually, Ivy Darrow did a hat pattern for us.
Yep.
Yeah. And Amelia Bruce, who was teaching at the Putney School and had grown up wearing sweaters. Oh, she was a fabulous knitter herself. But she had grown up in sweaters that she really liked the design of, and she knew she could help us more or less recreate those.
Yeah, so you were getting information from all kinds of different people.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, so it really was a concerted effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was the whole back end of it, the whole business end and marketing, and going to what were they called? The trade shows and the sheep shows.
And the sheep shows, which are wonderful because you then get to see animals that people had brought to show their own sheep, and there would be also sort of sheep to shawl events happening, sheep getting shorn and people spinning, and then making something out of their, right sort of handwork right before your eyes. Really wonderful.
That must have been fun.
Yeah,
Lots of fun.
fun.
And they still have those?
Oh yes.
And they're probably more popular now. They've probably grown.
Well, some of them are huge. There's one down in Maryland that's really very large, and there's one over in Rhinebeck, New York that's wonderful. But Vermont has its own, and New Hampshire has its own.
Yes. Yeah. And are there more sheep? Locally, are there more sheep?
Yeah, for a while, and I can't know exactly what the dates are, but for a while, sheep was pretty much gone in Vermont. Sheep were sort of moving west. But I guess in the 60s and 70s is when people began again to think they wanted to raise sheep. Yeah.
Yeah, and that also, going back, comparing the 70s to now, I mean, there's so many more people who are into crafts and into handwork and into making, and referring to themselves as makers.
Yes.
Which is kind of a wonderful phrase.
It is a wonderful.
Yeah, it is. I know that there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into creating the spinnery, which you will attest to. But it has been an amazing success.
It's amazing that it's still there. The people who have come to work there are people that like what's happening there. Often it's people who are interested in using yarn themselves, and they are just kind of, I think when visitors come, it's kind of magical to see this raw, smelly, raw material, wool, being transformed right before your eyes. The whole thing happens right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, Claire. That's a great description. Thank you so much. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for giving us a view into how that was created. I'm glad you had that idea.
So am I.
Thanks to all of you for tuning in today. Again, that was Claire's talking about the Green Mountain Spinnery up in Putney. We'll have the info at the end of the show. We'll also have the information if you would like to make a donation to BCTV in our situation with the FCC. That information will be following. So stay tuned, and thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next week.